Good morning and welcome to the first formal meeting of the Flood and Water Management Scrutiny Committee. I'm Paul Skinner, the Chairman of the committee. The audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcast via the county's website. I'd like to welcome the members of the press and the public who are in attendance and those that are listening online. First of all, we'll cover the health and safety requirements. And so this is an announcement. There is no fire drill planned. So in the event of an alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber via the rear doors and assemble on the front car park. We then need to wait in the car park until we get further instructions. Thank you. Before we move on to further with the main business of this meeting, can I remind you, if you wish to speak, can you raise your hand? And can I also remind members of the committee to switch on their microphones when invited to speak?
Chairman, just a point of order. I don't think the audio feed is working for those online or tuning in via Teams.
We'll pause till normal service is resumed then. Thank you, Tom. I would like also to welcome the officers presenting today who are participating via Microsoft Teams. Can I ask you to introduce yourselves at the beginning of your item or when you make a contribution? To ask questions or contribute to the meeting, please raise your hands or type speak in the chat function. Requests to speak will be collated by the scrutiny officer. Can I remind everybody to ensure that their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent? And please can you keep your questions and contributions succinct and concise. We'll now move on to the formal agenda. And Trina, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we do. We've had apologies from Councillor Brooks, Councillor Reid and Councillor Seymour. And we have a replacement member today. We have Councillor Mrs Austin as replacement member for Councillor Brooks for this meeting only. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Sorry, we've got a hand up, Chairman.
My microphone is working, yes, Chairman. I've had a telephone call. Councillor Ashton is bringing Councillor Ashley Morris. They'll be a few minutes late.
Thank you, Councillor Fleetwood. Right, we move on to item 2, declarations of councillors' interests. Do any members want to declare any interests on items on the agenda? No, we'll move on to item 3. These are the minutes of the last flood and water management scrutiny held on the 22nd of February. They are in the report between pages 5 and 14. I take it you've all read them. Can I have a proposer? Thank you. And the seconder, thank you, Ian. All in favour? Clearly it's carried. Thank you. Those minutes are agreed as a correct and accurate record. Moving on to item 4, the announcement by the chairman, executive councillors and lead officers. But first of all, I would like to begin by informing members about the Lincolnshire Climate Summit 2021, which is taking place on the 13th of October at the Epic Centre at Lincolnshire Showground. Should you require any further information, if you'd contact the clerk or your own scrutiny officer. Thank you. Moving on, there is a long agenda this morning with reports and presentations. Sorry, Tom.
I've just got an update, if that's okay, Chairman. On behalf of Colin, yeah, Councillor Davey. Have you not? Okay, sorry.
I'd therefore like to ask officers to only summarise the key points of their reports and what is required by the committee, and with regard to members of the committee, to stress the importance of concise questions and contributions. Now we have the Executive Councillor announcement, and Tom is going to make that on behalf of Colin. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman, and sorry for being so keen. Good morning, colleagues. In the absence of Councillor Davey, I'm pleased to be providing the update on behalf of our portfolio this morning. In May 2021, following the County Council elections, I was pleased to be made the Executive Support Councillor for Economic Development, Environment and Planning, and as a new member of the County Council and new in post, it has been wonderful to learn about the work of the County Council, including within your remit of this committee on flood and water management. Recently, I was pleased to join the committee chairman, officers and representatives of Digby Parish Council on site to view the recently completed Digby scheme, and I was particularly impressed to see how the scheme blends in with the natural environment, enhances biodiversity through the planting of wildflowers, the minimal amount of waste taken off-site, and finally, and most importantly, the fact that it should now protect many homes in the village. And I look forward to visiting further schemes in the coming months and years ahead. We continue to develop the Greater Lincolnshire Groundwater Project, Chairman, as part of the National Resilience and Innovation Programme. The aim of this is to explore new ways of managing flooding from groundwater, which nationally is the least well understood source of flooding. Communities in Lincolnshire were affected by it in 2019, and we are delighted to have been selected by government to take part in this programme. We're working with colleagues in North East Lincolnshire and North Lincolnshire councils to submit a detailed business case by January, with the aim of commencing work in the financial year 2022-23. And a total of £7.5 million has been allocated for this project, which will run until 2026. And it is designed to identify solutions that can work for Greater Lincolnshire, but also for other locations across the United Kingdom. Members may recall that this year we are trialling a scheme to support the installation of property-level resilience measures to better protect homes at risk of flooding where a larger scale scheme is not practicable for various reasons. We will be bringing an update on this project to a future meeting of this committee. Finally, members, many may have seen the article in Lincolnshire Live on Friday, so you may be aware about the potential water storage sites and reservoirs in Lincolnshire and elsewhere. As the article says, water companies are obliged to plan ahead to ensure that public water supplies are maintained in the future, especially with projected pressures on availability of water in the coming decades. With Lincolnshire and the wider Anglian region, Anglian Water is currently exploring a number of options, including large-scale storage and transfer, and the County Council and our partners will continue to engage in these deliberations, and when firmer proposals are put forward, we will examine them and respond to achieve the greatest possible benefits for Lincolnshire's communities, businesses and environment. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Tom. As being a Boston member, the biggest risks for Boston is fluvial flooding, not from the sea. But with the schemes that you mentioned, there is a major advantage to expand tourism to the whole area. So I quite welcome those announcements. So senior officers, do you have any announcements, David?
Nothing to add to Councillor Dyer's announcements, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to move the agenda around a little bit this morning. So item 9 will be 7, but I'm going to move on to item 5 at the moment, which is the Development Fund, Drainage Investigations and Flood Repairs, and I will ask Matthew Harrison to please present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. If I may, I will take the report as read, but just pick out a few key points for you, just to be aware of. So we have had £2.2 million allocated to look at flooding and drainage issues across the county, and this is to support an already full and active programme of highway and flood risk work. So this was some additional funding to try and address some key issues in the county that have been identified. That programme has continued to gather apace, and the current programme can be seen in Appendix B of the report. Many of the schemes that are being delivered are already highlighting and delivering local benefits to communities, but some of them, particularly those being delivered by the Technical Services Partnership, are far more extensive. And what we have learned is that sometimes when you put the spade in the ground, when working with drainage, you don't always know what you find. And some of these schemes have become far more extensive, but in being able to have some flexibility within programme, we are then able to hopefully deliver a much more wider scheme for the community, which will bring long-lasting benefits for communities rather than short-term fixes. So this is what we're currently working towards. There has been some success within the Development Fund, and we are hoping that we can continue this from April 2022 for a further 2 years with some additional funding, and the project group are already seeking to identify schemes that we can take forward as part of a further project. We have maintained some flexibility within the programme to deliver efficiencies and benefits, so members may notice that some schemes which were on the original list are not on the current list. That doesn't mean they are not being delivered, it is merely that they are not being delivered under the Development Fund for reasons that they don't necessarily meet the criteria, so are actually being delivered by Highways colleagues under the term maintenance contract. So I would just like to make that clear. Other than that, happy to take questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Matthew. I thoroughly welcome the investment into Lincolnshire to move these schemes along. This is true partnership working, so we need to be moving it on. We've already started to look at the near misses as well, and when they're collected together, that provides us a lot of data. Anyway, Councillor Fleetwood has indicated he'd like to ask a question.
Thank you. Whilst I'm very pleased to see that Cherry Willingham Fiskerton Road is included within the proposed scheme, I am concerned about a lot of the schemes in Bardney. I think there's, what, 1, 2, 3, 4 schemes in Bardney, one of which might go forward, but 3 of which won't. And the one that I'm really aghast about is Abbey Road, Bardney Lakes. This is flooding of the carriageway, which goes down to about 6-8 inches across the carriageway of probably 30-40 feet along the road. It's creating quite a lot of water damage to properties, and it's basically acting as a sump in the carriageway. I am concerned, though, that the cost attributed to that is £100,000, which seems quite phenomenal. Surely all it needs is a soak away and a bit of piping to get that water moved away. I am very, very concerned about it.
Thank you. Would you like to come back, Matthew?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Fleetwood. Yes, as I say, this is a programme that is running alongside a full highway programme of works as well. And when the original programme was developed, it was based on what we anticipated at the time and what Highways colleagues anticipated at the time. Further investigations, which was one of the key allocations for this programme to investigate and deliver works, have obviously changed the outlook and scope of some of these projects as we've moved forward. So I would just reiterate that it doesn't mean that works won't necessarily take place there, just not under the specific Development Fund programme, and may well get picked up under the Highways term contract through Highways colleagues. But I'm more than happy to pick the details up with Bardney, with Councillor Fleetwood outside of this meeting if you so wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Clark and then Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. Being new to this group, this committee, I read the papers and I've got 2 questions on, this first item. The first one is, when we was at the meeting on Friday, the full council, the leader of the Conservatives said that all the people are interested in is potholes. Now, when I look at this, I wonder why flooding, on this particular one, 2.2 million has been put aside to it, but then on potholes, there's £10 million. Where's the rational thinking behind this? And I'm sure that the people that, were surveyed with potholes, when they get flooded, flood will be the main issue. So I'm just wondering, is 2.2 million actually enough money for this? And the second one, probably related to this, but I've been dying to ask it. When we go on about flood management, why, and I've asked this question previously at other committees, why do we build on floodplains and then complain when they flood? Thank you.
Would you like to answer that, Matthew?
I will do my best. I think regarding the funding, it's difficult for me to comment on that, obviously, in the sense that is what has been allocated by
Indeed,
Council.
it would be unfair to ask you to comment on that.
However, I would just reiterate my point that we are looking to seek additional funding from April 2022 to continue this programme of work to really seek further benefits over a further 2 years. So hopefully that's a positive step.
I think you're right, but this is 2.2 million, but amongst the partnership, there's other partners putting money in, so that it's a whole lot more than 2.2 million, and I'll bring Tom in.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, I'll come back on that point as the officers can't respond. I think it was a big issue in the election for many of us campaigning, and I think the executive's view is that because highways, there's so much work that still needs to be done, they've put that additional funding in to get on top of the issue, especially with rural roads across the county. But the 2.2 million is there, plus other schemes through partners, and indeed highways do some flood works as well. Like, for instance, in my division in Waddington, highways did some flooding repairs on Station Road. And as I'm doing posts as well, Councillor Clark, I've been impressed by how officers investigate instances of flooding and then see what can be done. And I think that was something I took away from Digby, where there was a flooding event, and investigations were carried out by various partners and organisations, and then works were put in place to try and resolve that. So obviously, if there's any instances of flooding in your division, I'm very happy to speak with officers about that. Councillor Clark. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tom. I'll move on to Councillor Alison Austin next. Then I'll...
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think I better make the most of my time on the committee. The scheme almost at the end of the list in Curtin, Station Road Curtin, with the 200,000 attached to it. I thought we had got a definite start date for that. And I know we've been talked on site through both Councillor Brooks and myself, together with people from various agencies, because this is a multi-agency scheme. But I thought we had got a definite start date, but it is certainly a scheme that's going to cause major disruption in the centre of, well, Curtin is a village, but on the other hand, it's bigger than many small towns. You know, I really would like some definite dates and any other useful information at this stage, because it's not a small scheme. It is a very serious scheme, this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Would you like to come back?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Austin. Yes, Curtin is actually one of the more major schemes on this particular programme. It is a very large scheme and a very complex scheme as well that involves both highway and private land as well, and various legal agreements to come together to make this happen. So this is one of those schemes I referred to that has actually built and is much larger than was initially anticipated. However, as a result of that, we should be able to see some long-term benefits to tackling the flooding issues that we have had in Curtin, which has suffered numerous times over recent years from surface water flooding events. So again, it's one of those, rather than a short-term fix, we want to make sure we can identify all of the key problems and deliver much wider benefits to the whole village. Taking your point about the disruption, with such a large scheme, inevitably there will be disruption, but I am aware that colleagues in our technical services partnership are working up with some communication around that for local residents and those that may be affected by the scheme. And of course, we will do our best to minimise disruption, but hopefully the long-term benefits that we will see for the village will outweigh the short-term disruption, I hope. Thank you.
May I just make one quick comment? For the benefit, obviously, of people who don't know this situation, it's one that's been ongoing, usually at this time of year when you get the very heavy rain, but it isn't just surface water flooding. It's flooding to the same property over and over again, and also to commercial properties, well, both of which are involved with food. So, you know, it's not a little scheme. And unfortunately, interestingly, Councillor Clark said, well, why do we build on a floodplain? These properties were there several hundred years ago, long before people ever thought about floodplains. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. There'll be some geological challenges there. There's some nice running silt, so beware and factor that in. Councillor Baxter, next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm obviously new to the council, new to this committee. Looking down the list, testing my geography, there doesn't appear to be, there's only one scheme south of Grantham on this list. Is this because we have no flood problems, or is it because there are flood problems tied up with Anglian Water? Because certainly at the parish council meetings I attend, it's a very popular subject of conversation, and we do often talk about the joined upness between Anglian Water and Lincolnshire County Council. So have you got any plans for the south of the county?
It is just worth bearing in mind, as I say, that this programme identified particular areas within a specified budget to try and tackle some issues. So, yes, there are certainly things going on county-wide across a much wider programme that's being delivered by the flood risk team and the highway asset teams as well for more localised flooding and drainage issues. So, if there are any particular areas of concern, more than happy to take those away. As I say, we are looking at a future programme of work from April 2022 to hopefully continue this. And we do have the very effective flood risk partnership where we work very closely with colleagues in Anglian Water as well as IDBs, district authorities and the Environment Agency, of course. So we are certainly not working alone, and if there are any areas where we can come together to deliver partnership schemes and wider benefits to communities, we will seek to do so. So more than happy to pick up any specific areas if you have any concerns after the meeting.
Councillor Haigh, did you have a question? Do we have any more questions? The actions from this were the committee were invited to review and comment on the progress. I think we've had a thorough debate. You've asked that if anybody has concerns within their areas that they contact, and we flag up the importance, which is what we're here for. So I move that the committee is satisfied with the progress reported, and I request that our comments recorded are taken into account. So is it agreed? Thank you. Moving on to item 6, the investigations undertaken under section 19. And once again, you've volunteered again. Oh, David, you're going to lead in.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'll introduce this one, and then Matt can support any matters of detail as we get to them. This is a standing item that we bring to the Flood and Water Scrutiny Committee. It reviews and monitors progress on one of the County Council's duties as lead local flood authority, namely the duty to investigate flooding incidents from any source. This is a standard template that we bring, and as you'll see there, we do ask members to identify any sites in advance and notify Democratic Services if they do wish to ask questions about specific sites, so that we can make sure we bring full and up-to-date information to the meeting. We've not had any notification, I don't believe, of any particular sites. So overall then, Chairman, key points to make are since the last meeting in February 2021, We've had a total of 21 new flood investigations commenced. At the moment, we believe those represent something like 25 properties affected. But of course, as we get into the detail of the investigation, it's possible that that total can change both up and down as we understand more clearly what those local impacts may have been. If I can draw members' attention to the tables and the graphs on page 28, you'll see how those investigations have distributed over the year. As usual, it's a response effectively to weather events that we've had, which unfortunately we can't yet control. We are working on that, of course. But you will see that, again, the overall trend is for the number of investigations that the council is responsible for increasing over time. Although we've not had a year quite like 2019 yet, which was extreme for the number of investigations, over the last few years, since 2013, the general trend is for more and more of these investigations to need commencing. That may be partly because members of the public are getting more used to reporting incidents to us, but it does also seem to correspond to an increasing frequency of events and an overall increasing frequency of intense weather and creating these impacts on the ground. I think one thing that I would like to point out is in the past we've worked with the committee to develop the way in which we present this information to you. We've had in the past quite large-scale spreadsheets, which I think we'd all agree have been somewhat difficult to access, somewhat difficult to use. So we are currently developing a much more user-friendly approach through a system known as Power BI, which will enable us to use a much more visual way of tracking progress with existing investigations, tracking their location, and making that information much more accessible, much more visible to members of the committee. And we're really looking forward to trialling that and demonstrating it in full at the next committee meeting. I think until then, I'll leave it there from a committee and hand over to members for any general questions on the report.
Thank you very much, David. Councillor Fleetwood, you indicated.
Thank you. Yes, just going to the tables, figure 1 shows a very high peak in July. I assume this is the 30th of July when there was a severe cloud burst just to the east of Lincoln. It affected Cherry Willingham, Reef and Fiskerton. It didn't make it as far as Bardney, but it seemed to be just on the edge of Lincoln where there was a lot of water. The highways, the drains didn't cope with it. In the middle of Cherry Willingham, as an example, there was Range Rovers just about managing to go through a flood, but cars were struggling and getting lost in it. There were houses where water was flowing into the front of the garage and out of the rear. There was conservatories in a similar format. But my concern is that this is Section 19 reporting, and Section 19 reporting only deals with flooding inside dwellings. It doesn't take into account flooding inside outbuildings, garages, sheds, which are near enough as bad. They're very near misses. What are the county council and others doing with regard to trying to collate that information with the very, very near misses?
Thank you for the question. Matthew.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Fleetwood. As David pointed out, there is a web link within the report that gives information on the existing Section 19s that we have to formally investigate when there has been internal flooding. But colleagues within the flood risk team have also been working on a similar system for the near-miss data. And that picks up on those issues that Councillor Fleetwood quite rightly raises there. Colleagues are actually very close to having that completed, so at the next committee we should be able to demonstrate the near-miss data as well online, and that information will be readily available just as the Section 19 data is for members to investigate and interrogate. And that has been quite an undertaking, but very, very close to having that completed.
Yeah. Yep. That's an important piece of work. We've been working with this committee actually to develop that system over the last few months. One thing I would point out as well is Councillor Fleetwood did quite correctly identify a key issue that we're finding with surface water flooding, and that is that it tends to be very intense at specific locations, and not very far away, very little can be happening at all. So it's quite unpredictable in terms of where and when it happens. It can be very intense at quite small points. And again, as you'll see from the numbers in the table there, 21 investigations, 25 properties, that indicate that helps illustrate a key pattern with surface water flooding, that it tends to affect individual properties on in a fairly scattered way. So that again makes it quite challenging to bring resources to bear on a number of, on more than one property at a time. So it does tend to increase pressure on resource when you have a large number of properties affected in that way, but not in one location.
Thank you for that, David. I do know that all the partnership report into that, so that's really quite a robust piece of work. Councillor Martin, please.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 points, if I may. First of all, I think every meeting we've had for the last year or more, I've asked about historic Section 19 reports that we're still waiting for. There's quite a few outstanding in East Lindsey and in Horncastle in particular that have now been around for a long time. So to flag up once again that we are still waiting for some historic reports, and I know the answer I've been given is that we don't always wait for the report to do some work. However, the person who gets flooded is always urgently wanting the report. So I will raise again that issue because it is outstanding still. And secondly, I got called out at the weekend to a case of somebody flooding, and there will be at least one more Section 19 report coming in this morning from Horncastle. But it was quite an interesting one in as much as the water was coming down from the building site behind it. It is a building site, and there would have been a SUD scheme agreed as part of that planning application. But at what stage does the SUD scheme actually kick in? Because if a site is a couple of years or 3 years been built out, and the SUD scheme isn't put in, people downstream of that are going to have to suffer for an awful long time before actually the SUD scheme is put in. So hopefully that'll be one of the points that's looked at in the Section 19 investigation. But for me, it's always highlighted a concern about SUD schemes, I have to say, and the effectiveness and at what stage they come in. Thank you.
Who's coming back on that one?
Thank you, Chairman. Only to support what has been said there, and the Section 19 investigation will thoroughly look at the causation of, and that may well be an issue that we have to look at going forward in more detail, as you quite rightly point out. But that will come out of the Section 19 investigation. So support those comments. Thank you.
Councillor Bunny.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Martin's actually asked part of the question I was going to do, so I won't bring that up. But I've got one case where there's somebody uses his own pumping system to stop the flooding, and he, of course, would be a near miss, but because he's actually pumped it all out, it doesn't actually get forward. Now, is that sort of thing something which will be picked up in future?
If you can provide us with the details of that, Councillor, I'm sure we'll be very interested to have a look at that. Is that under what circumstances does that kind of flooding happen?
It's to do with runoff, surface runoff, right. And there's businesses around it. It's the fact that he's been doing this, or his parents have been doing it for years, and now it's getting to the point with a lot more development in that area of the Market Raisin, or Middle Raisin, that it's becoming more frequent. But I'll get that sorted.
Please, thank you.
Councillor Ashton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just picking up on the observation that clearly we are experiencing higher volume and higher intensity rainfall events, and they come come very suddenly and can be very localised. Would there be any merit, I'd be interested to know whether it's something we do, whether there's any merit in mapping how much, in terms of volume and intensity of rainfall, various bits of the county have endured and withstood, assuming that effectively systems are tested and overwhelmed when they haven't been tested and overwhelmed beforehand. I just wondered if there's any merit in plotting where in the county has had what volume of rainfall, say, over the last 10 years, and we know actually it stood up okay.
It's an interesting question, Chairman. I'm not sure technically how one might necessarily go about doing that, or if indeed we do have that information. I think it's something I would want to speak to our colleagues at the Environment Agency and potentially the Met Office about as well, to see if that kind of mapping would be feasible. We certainly do have the surface water flood risk maps, which indicate on a sort of a generic incidence of flooding where flooding would be more likely to occur, which is that is primarily based on topography. Rather than actually patterns of weather, but I suspect that the unpredictability of weather patterns might mean that you would be hard pushed to actually get a particularly usable pattern coming out of mapping of that nature. But I'm more than happy to have a look at it.
Thank you, David. Obviously, our internal drainage boards keep some good records, and quite a lot of the large farmers do for the same reasons. So there should be some data out there to be able to be used. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. This idea of looking at near-miss situations, it concerns me somewhat because, of course, the first question is, what is a near-miss? And often it's things like blocked drains and so on, which probably come back to highways or the district council. But we have the sort of criterion at the moment which says, because you have people saying, well, why can't we call the fire brigade and get the road pumped out? And of course the answer is no, because the fire brigade will only come and pump out a dwelling where there is interior flooding. And yet I think of one particular one, which was Lenton Way in Frampton. I think it was last Easter, although 1 year merges with another now. And I think the estate road was flooded, and it wasn't just a small amount of flooding, was it, Richard? It was flooded for something like 2 months. And there, it didn't go in any properties. It stopped just a couple of feet, very conveniently, in front of a front door. But are we going to be raising public expectations? Have we got the capacity to deal with all these near misses, as well as the actual internal flooding situations? This is, I think, something that we have to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the key point to note about plotting the near-miss data is that it's about developing a deeper and richer context for the information that we have where properties are flooded and where we do investigate directly with the Section 19. As we've seen on a number of occasions over the past few years, while we have the formal criteria to investigate, which is set out clearly in policy, that happens in a broader context. And we have in numerous occasions found that there are smaller incidents locally where interventions can take place. Again, that's where the Development Drainage Fund that Matthew's been referring to earlier has come into play in a number of locations. That's where a number of situations where there have been temporary blockages to roads, bridges have become difficult to use. We've been able to use the programme under the Development Fund to address some of those issues which have been flagged up to us and reported by members of the public, which are effectively near misses. So the near miss data will enable us to better contextualise where we have section 19s. So for example, we may have a number of what might look like disconnected section 19s, but the near miss data might help us actually understand that those are part of a single issue which can be dealt with a single scheme and gives us much stronger evidence to apply for external funding to put that scheme in place. So in my view, the near miss data helps us with that kind of broader context, and hopefully, well, it's designed in fact to help us access more resource over a period of time if we've got that stronger context and that stronger evidence base.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. I can't help thinking from reading these reports that I feel like I'm being appointed to the committee by King Canute, because the impending disaster of climate change is going to mean that we get more severe weather events and we get more flooding, and there is going to be more trouble. So I'm interested in the comment at the bottom of page 28, I think it is, which says the process will be made more efficient by the sourcing of additional resource. I'm sorry if I missed it, but what scale of additional resource are we talking about? And are we talking about additional resource for the investigations or the additional resource for the systems, to put the systems in place and also to maintain the systems? And just finally, to what extent are the problems or the flooding problems caused by human error or system neglect? And do we prosecute or do we take action against those people or those organisations that have failed to take the action necessary to prevent the flooding? Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Baxter. If I can deal with your final point first, we have got a paper slightly later on the agenda looking at our developing approach to working with riparian owners in terms of dealing with those issues. I think it's quite hard to put a proportion on where is human error result, where is just natural process the result. In many respects, because we are looking at changing patterns of impacts, I think what we are finding is that systems that have worked well for many decades are simply coming under more and more pressure because they're being asked to do more and more than has been the case in the past. So I think to some extent we are seeing the impacts of some of those changing weather patterns over the past decade. In terms of resource, we already gear our capital programme to lever in effectively 100% external resource. So for every pound we put in capital terms, we look to get a pound back from external resources, and we will continue to do that. At the moment, that is the main source of external capital resource, and that comes through a government scheme called Grant in Aid, and that's essentially available through our colleagues in the Environment Agency, and ultimately comes through DEFRA. But again, one of the things that we are looking to do through the Development Fund, through the Resilience programme that we're running, is to explore ways of opening up additional sources, to involve local communities in working with us to develop their own approach to resilience to flood risk. Generally, we are always open to developing new ways of resourcing this area of work. But as you'll appreciate, as a public sector organisation, pressures on all areas of our work are always high. There's always more that we want to do than we're immediately resourced for. So it's up to us to develop the best possible data, the best possible information, the best possible evidence base we can to make that case.
Thank you for that, David. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some interesting information here today. A reference was made to the Met Office a few minutes ago. So could I ask some more information on that, please? For example, is that a successful working arrangement? And do we find the local forecast useful, such as accurate or regarding moving of local resources or redirecting resources? So some more information that would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I'm more than happy to provide more information outside the meeting. We do use the Met Office's information through the Lincolnshire Resilience Forum and through emergency planning. They would probably be better placed to give you the detail of that information than I am currently, but I'm happy to provide that information outside the meeting.
Thank you. Any further questions? Right, we're invited to review and comment on the investigations taken by county under section 19. And I think we've done that. I think we've discussed it well enough. I move that we receive the report and request that our comments be recorded and be taken into account. And is everybody agreed? Thank you. I'm just going to change the running order slightly this morning, probably in view of what we've just covered. So I'm going to move item 9, which is the riparian project update, up to being the next item. This is something myself and the Vice Chairman have been pretty keen on, because we are aware my mailbag, both at county and district level, has lots of these in. So I'll move on to Ryan, is it? Oh, Matthew, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just quickly introduce this paper, thank you, and then probably bring my colleague Ryan Davies in afterwards for any questions. But if I may take the paper as read once more, but as you say, this does neatly link into the previous report and is actually a project that has developed out of that to look at where we have riparian issues across the county. And working with partners and stakeholders under the existing framework of the Flood Risk Partnership, but also extending out to other stakeholders, as well as North and North East Lincolnshire Council, to give a true Greater Lincolnshire perspective on this. We have working groups set up to look at riparian issues across the Greater Lincolnshire area. And this initiative at the moment is unique to Lincolnshire with the scale and depth that we are looking into this. So part of this is to review existing mechanisms, see how we could perhaps do things differently around riparian issues. And within the report, you'll see that we are very keen to develop and embed a county-wide enforcement guide, strengthen the existing strong culture and cooperation across the Greater Lincolnshire area, and bring in our colleagues wherever possible to have a true partnership approach, whether that be internal drainage boards, the Environment Agency, district authorities, and make sure that we address the whole scope and range of what the riparian issues bring, from planning and property sales and awareness raising amongst communities, to actually where riparian landowners can make a difference and risk management authorities can assist with that. I will perhaps leave it there, but we're more than happy to take questions. And as I say, I have my colleague Ryan Davies with me today, who has been working heavily on this project for us in the flood risk team. So hopefully between us we can answer any questions that members may have. Thank you.
I'm going to bring Councillor Fleetwood in next, but you say riparian landowners, there are certain areas that actually belong to nobody, so that's where it really gets exciting. Thank you, Councillor Fleetwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, riparian ownership I think is very, very important. And yes, people talk in terms of rivers, streams and other such things as being very, very important in flooding. But riparian ownership is more and more of an issue, where people will, in their own little residences, have a little ditch across the garden. They'll cut the grass and they'll empty the mower box into the bottom of a ditch and think it has no consequence. The net result of that is, as soon as it rains, suddenly the ditches are blocked, and the water tends to well back and flood areas. It needs to be, I think this needs to be stressed, that those little areas of ground which hold water back in residential properties where people have difficulty mowing, where they're filling holes in, etc., need to be emphasised. The hard surfaces attached to many driveways nowadays, people will suddenly start to remove a gravel driveway and then suddenly put a concrete surface in, and suddenly you start to get more flash runoff from it. Those issues need to be incorporated. So there's a whole lot more than just the basis of where these major flood areas come from. But the important thing is we need to send a message out. We need to communicate with the public exactly what their problems are. And it isn't necessarily Environment Agency, Drainage Board, Anglian Water. I think it comes down to a lot of domestic, or dare I say it, some farmers with ditches around fields which get filled in. They need to, if they are going to start filling in watercourses, they need to be piped with an adequate capacity to cope with flows and runoff. This I think is what is missing from this report. We really need to communicate it out to the greater world, so they understand that the responsibility isn't just pointing the finger at an organisation. It can come down to the individual landowner.
Thank you. Anybody want to comment?
If I may just come back on that, yeah, thank you, Chairman, thank you, Councillor Fleetwood. Yes, completely agree. Awareness raising is a big part of this project that we are looking at for riparian rights and responsibilities. And if I could just draw your attention to page 49 of the report, where we do highlight that we are undertaking a questionnaire with selected parish and town councils to help identify how engagement with and support from local councils can be enhanced with regards to the riparian network. So that is a large part of what this project is about, and fully support your comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Ashton, please.
Thank you. I welcome the report and the aspirations behind it. There's a lot of good stuff in here, not least just picking up there to date under the work completed on the feasibility of improving mapping of the riparian network and establishing responsibility for maintenance. It feels a fantastic aspiration. At the same time, it seems a absolutely vast piece of work, and I'd be really interested to see how we get on actually attributing that responsibility and ownership, and how and what facility there is for resolving disputes. Of it's not my responsibility, it's my neighbour's. I've got the hedge, or my neighbour's got the hedge, and I'd just be interested how we plot a course through that. And also, when this comes, I mean, I fully support proactive enforcement of anyone who has filled in a dike without putting a pipe in it. But at the same time, carrying out that enforcement, whether it's on an internal drainage board in an internal drainage board extended area, or if we were looking to do it as a lead local flood authority, whoever has to do that enforcement has to have a budget and resource to do that, staff and money. And I'm not sure how many drainage boards out there, let alone other local authorities, have the sufficient capacity in terms of spare money and spare staff to do this piece of work, and whether they will ever have is a question. I'm fully behind the idea of this. I'm just concerned about how we actually make it happen on the ground going forward.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that question. And I have to say I do fully support those comments, because as we have delved further and further into riparian rights and responsibilities, it is very much a large and complex issue that involves numerous risk management authorities, of course, as well as landowners and private individuals for a complex range of reasons. So we currently have working groups set up that involve internal drainage boards, district authority colleagues, the Environment Agency, and as part of that piece of work we have been looking at options to take forward and where resource might be needed moving forward, acknowledging those comments that you make there. And also acknowledging that some of these matters are also being looked at anyway as part of a national initiative through the Environment Agency. So really it's identifying within the working group where we need to concentrate our focus and efforts, where there are those gaps that we really want to try and focus in on. And that is where the list of options comes in, which we are currently working through, and hopefully, as it says in the report, by late October, we should have that down to a short list from the working groups of where we think we need to really be focusing our attention on those areas. And of course, more than happy to report continued progress with this initiative at future flood risk and scrutiny meetings as we move forward. So hopefully that helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. We might have to interface with the legal profession as well, because there's a certain element of buyer beware as well. Councillor Crawford, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with what our fellow councillors have said, but also a number of private owners of properties and businesses are totally unaware of riparian rights, and we need to get that public message across. We have a very good county council magazine that goes to every home. Could we not put an article in there to make people aware that what your rights are and what you should do to help protect yourself? Thank you.
A very good point. Matt?
Yes, just to support that comment wholeheartedly. The communication is key here, particularly with private individuals, as you say, and through working with the council's communications department, those are exactly the sorts of things that we will be looking at to try and get that message out as best we possibly can. So I would certainly say yes, that is something that we'll be looking at doing. Okay.
Thank you, Matthew. Tom, would you like to just interject?
Thank you. That was an interesting point, Councillor Crawford. And as well as using the county magazine, I'm just wondering if officers use the facilities, is it a monthly email that gets sent to parish councils as well? Potentially looking at using that facility as well to get the message out.
Thank you.
I think it's very important to get the messages out. Councillor Bonney, please.
Thank you. I really want to just echo that my comments were going to be on communications and education, and I do think it's also important to get that message through to parish councils. I know that Market Rasen Town Council is taking part in a survey at the moment, I believe, but the clerk and various members there were struggling to understand exactly what was required in terms of terminology and so on, and actually the knowledge of what has been covered up and whatever. So I think it's incredibly important that we concentrate particularly on that and actually have a multi-function way of getting the messages across. And I would argue also not just in word, making it something that is quite easily to see and pick up would help.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to endorse what Councillor Fleetwood said about residents cutting the grass and putting it in dikes. I've had experience of not the residents doing it, but contractors doing it. And what they do, they cut it and, you know, it's cheaper just put it in the dike. But over the years, of course, it blocks it up. So if we're looking at, you know, enforcing it with residents, we should do it with contractors as well. Thank you.
Wholeheartedly agree. Councillor Richard Austin, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been a councillor for 15 years or so now, and this I've understood very clearly that very few members of the public have any idea what the word riparian means and the importance of it. So I want to emphasise what Councillor Crawford's been saying. There needs to be clear understanding and probably legislation saying that before you ever think about filling up a dike, there has to be permission given. Most dikes that are filled in, riparian dikes that are filled in with inadequate pipes, and people need to understand that dikes are much more efficient than pipe work to contain water, get water away in a flood situation. So there's a lot of education to be done. Let's have lots of articles and reports on television to emphasise this issue and get the message across.
I wholeheartedly agree, but also if a pipe was put in 25, 30 years ago, the chance of it being right sized now with the way the climate's changed. Chances are next to none. Councillor Martin, please.
Thank you. Just to agree with Councillor Bunny, really, about parish councils. My town clerk actually gave me the survey to fill in because she didn't understand what riparian owners were all about. So she said, will you understand these things, and gave it to me to fill in, which I did. But the point that kept coming across on every question was, as a parish or town council, we just do not have the resources to be able to do anything about this at all, to be honest. In the current situation, with all the legislation and things that parish and town councils have to deal with, riparian owners and those sort of issues are fairly low down the list. So yes, we do need to educate people, but we also need to educate them about the route they need to send complaints or problems, etc., because there is a lack of understanding both of the role of riparian owners, but to who to refer applications or problems to if necessary. So just add that, please, to the education, where the route for problems to be referred. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that one. Councillor Alison Austin.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we've got two situations. We've got the long-standing ones, and I think these often relate to sometimes housing developments some 20 plus years ago, often ones that have got horrible, what do you call them, conifer hedges along one side of them, and of course you cut them down, bits them down, and just drop them into the dike, and there's no water ever in that dike, theoretically. But of course there could be, and it's not you that'll get flooded, it could be someone the odd mile or two upstream or downstream. But I think in new developments, I mean, I know one very big one that's happening on the edge of Frampton, that it does say, well, this is a riparian dike, but come on, it must be spelled out within that development exactly who is going to take charge of that. I think that particular one has done, but I think it's going to be adopted by the management company. But these management companies that, you know, when there's a big new estate, well, it's all right to start with, but then the overarching developer perhaps either goes into administration or it's taken over by someone else, and 3 or 4 generations of management companies later, our local borough enforcement officer is having to send a reminder every year over one particular development. So this is something that has got to be very, very specifically laid down at the local development level, I think, the planning level, when permission is given. It's very hard to catch up retrospectively, but we must make sure we're very clear from now on. Thank you.
Do we have any further questions? Right, Morgan Ray, who's EA, shared a link on chat, a guide on riparian responsibilities, and Trina will share that with the members of the committee. So that's really, really useful. I think we've had an excellent debate. So I don't think we could have covered it more thoroughly. I think one of the things that's standing out mainly here is the communications package ought to be part of the scope. And there's communications. Moving on from that, is it all agreed? Thank you very much. I'll move on to the next item, and that is the Environmental Agency update, and that's Morgan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, committee. My name's Morgan Ray. I'm the Area Flood and Coastal Risk Manager for the Environment Agency for our Lincs and Northamptonshire area. I cover mostly the Greater Lincolnshire area. The paper I've provided for you is intended to be a quick reference guide for some of our vital strategic work which we're undertaking, which will provide hopefully a healthy pipeline of projects in the years to come. It's also vital in helping us to work in partnership with others to provide flood risk management activities in the various areas throughout Lincolnshire. I've got a brief presentation which hopefully I was going to share on the screen. Hopefully that's just coming up now.
Morgan, it's being shared.
Okay, I can't see it from this end. Okay, I'll take your word for it and carry on. Okay, if you want to go through to the Humber 2100 slide, which would be the second slide, number 2. This is work. What I'll do is I'll do a brief introduction into each of the bits of strategic work as we go through. It's largely documented in the paper in more detail, but I'll just explain a little bit as we go through. So you can see on the right there, we've got the Humber 2100 area. It's largely not in Lincolnshire. It's it's around sort of the Humber estuary, but obviously the tidal reaches do extend into Lincolnshire, the River Trent to sort of Gainsborough and Torksey, and up the River Ancombe into a small part of Lincolnshire. And obviously the study area extends down the coast into the East Lindsey District Council area. So Lincolnshire authorities are very much a fundamental partner going forward in the Humber 2100 work. It's critically important. Nearly 500,000 people live in the Humber estuary and affected by it. One of the largest trading estuaries in the country. Our latest information suggests that we could see sea level rise of up to sort of 1.3 metres over the next 100 years. So it's vital that we carry out this piece of work because how we manage flood risk in one part of the estuary can really affect it in other parts as well. It's vital that we work in partnership with all those authorities that are shown on the screen there in order to be able to achieve this going forward. Do you want to go on to the next slide, please? Okay, our East Coast work is really important going forward. I think probably the committee is well aware. Deb Campbell's presented to the committee previously, so I won't dwell on this too much. But obviously the floodplain extends up to 15 kilometres inland, and we've got 26 kilometres of sort of foreshore there between Saltfleet and Gibraltar Point. Defences were improved following the flooding in 1953, where, as you're probably aware, no doubt 43 people lost their lives. But we need to consider the long-term future of flood risk management in this area. In the short term, we're committed to carry on with the work that you see on the right there, the beach nourishment work. However, it's an appropriate time that we consider, how we provide that flood risk management going forward for something like about 30,000 homes, 19,000 static caravans, and I think there's around 35,000 hectares of agricultural land which are affected. Do you want to go on to the next one, please? So obviously the Steeping Catchment Action Plan is an important piece of strategic work which we've got underway at the moment. I'll leave that there because Chairman's asked me to say a little bit more about the work at Wainfleet at the end. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we're on to the Lower Witham. We classify the Lower Witham as the River Witham, its floodplain and tributaries between Lincoln and Boston. It's a very, as we've seen over the last couple of years, it's a very important area as far as flood risk management is concerned. There's something like about 300 kilometres of flood embankments, some of which are a significant age now, approaching or in excess of 200 years. And with increasing flood risks, it's putting more strain than ever on these sort of ageing assets. So it's important that we define how we want to manage flood risk going forward. So the work that we've got ongoing at the minute is looking forward to providing a suite of projects, hopefully commencing around 2025 onwards, to better manage flood risk for those assets and for the communities going forward. Surveys are just about beginning at the moment, to look at the condition of those banks and the topographical information around those banks, see if we've had slippages, and to look at the condition of those structures. Following that, we'll be carrying out updating the modelling for the catchment before we can start to look at how we will best manage flood risk in that catchment going forward. Just go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we're looking now at the Billinghayes Skirt System Review. So this is something which we have undergo a partnership with the IDB, in particular. The local community are also involved with that, and other professional partners. So following the flooding or the high levels a couple of years ago, we're really looking at the maintenance aspects of this catchment, working closely with people like the NFU with that, looking to set a baseline for maintenance and working out how we can work in partnership to better maintain that system going forward, and what is the most appropriate maintenance for that system. That work will then feed into the Lower Witham review. On the right, we're looking at the Upper Witham System Review. So effectively, this is the River Witham between Lincoln and Grantham, so the floodplain area above Lincoln. It's classified largely as a sort of a low consequence area. However, you can see through there's some high risk critical infrastructure within that catchment. So we've got the A1 and we've got the East Coast Main Line as well. So we feel that it's really important that we look at the flood risks for the Witham and its tributaries there, because there could be significant impacts on nationally significant infrastructure there. So that work is ongoing at the moment. We've highlighted several opportunities in that system to reappraise the current constraints of the watercourse through embankments, perhaps looking towards reconnecting the floodplains in certain areas and promoting natural flood management. Go on to the next one, please. This is the work that's been undertaken in our Welland and Nene catchments. Now, obviously, the lower reaches of those watercourses are within Lincolnshire, so that would be particularly significant to this committee. So looking at ageing assets, how we manage that flood risk, that sort of ageing asset infrastructure going forward. So structures on the sort of the navigable River Leen, looking at the tidal Nene strategy and the Lower Welland strategic approach. Again, feeding into future schemes. Next slide, please. This is an area specific, but obviously a large part of what we're doing now, hoping to sort of reconnect floodplains, looking at natural flood management. We're looking at how we can use nature to help climate resilience over the next 6 or 7 years. So our environment programme team is carrying out strategic work to look at the right locations for natural flood management, particularly where we've got some of this other strategic work being undertaken at the moment. Wainfleet is a good example, and I'll come on to that again in a minute. But we've also introducing natural flood management at Swayton, working very closely with Black Sluice IDB to achieve that. Next slide, please. The Fens, obviously the Fens covers a large part of Lincolnshire, but also goes beyond that into Cambridgeshire and Norfolk. So the National Flood Risk Management Strategy has drawn the Fens area together and provided its own measure, and it's about the only measure within the national strategy that actually is area specific. So measure 1.5.4 sort of states by 2025, the Environment Agency will work with farmers, land managers, water companies, internal drainage boards and other partners to develop a long-term plan for managing future flood risk in the Fens. And the actions shown there are how we intend to sort of start achieving that. So it's currently just getting underway, but it's important that we consider these lowland areas as a whole, and the Fens measure gives us the way of doing that. I might pause there. I've had a very quick canter through the strategic work across Lincolnshire that we're carrying out to provide for that future pipeline of schemes. I'll take any questions on that now, and then perhaps go on to the steeping action plan after that, if that's okay, Chairman.
Thank you, Morgan. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. I don't know if this is the wrong question in the wrong place, but there is concern in the Deepings about the depth of the River Welland as it runs through Market Deeping and Deeping St James. Who would be the right person at the Environment Agency or anywhere else to ask about the changing flow of the river, please?
Okay, so it's probably me in the short term. You can I'm quite happy for you to get in touch with me after the meeting, and then I will put you in touch with the right people that's got the knowledge of the local catchment. So I'm happy to do that.
Any further questions? Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Morning. The question asked earlier was on floodplains and, why build on floodplains. Have you got any idea how many, or the area that floodplains cover that have been built on in Lincolnshire in the last few years, or, last 10 years? Thank you.
I can't give you that number off the top of my head. Obviously, we take our role as a statutory consultee very seriously. So the Environment Agency is a statutory consultee to the planning process, and we will work very closely with planning authorities to make sure that development is appropriate and well managed. And there's the planning guidance which help us to do that. Obviously, within Lincolnshire, we have existing communities and existing, such as Boston is a good example, where it's within both sort of the tidal and fluvial floodplains, so the sort of the tidal and the river floodplains. And obviously, we do have to work very closely with the planning authorities in locations like that to make sure that going forward, those communities are sustainable and safe.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton, please.
Thank you. I'm obviously familiar with the geography of the River Witham and Boston Haven and up there, and how essentially there isn't the river obviously is tidal through the town, and then you have Sluice-gate. Having found myself in Wisbech yesterday afternoon, I'm acutely aware that the other rivers that we're mentioning here, the Nene and the Ouse, and their tributaries, are tidal an incredibly long way inland. River Nene right the way to the Dog and Doublet Bridge near Whittlesea. And that is a vast mileage of effectively river, which to a greater or lesser extent, which need to be defended against tidal surge and the sea. looking at our papers, I see that the Neen structures will, will come to the end in 40 years on the navigable bit, and I'm just wondering whether we've got a or the Environment Agency has a rough cost of what it's expected to cost to replace or upgrade the structures that are likely to be needed upgrading over their lifetime, at the end of that lifetime. The reason I'm asking these questions in respect to rivers that aren't necessarily all or part in Lincolnshire is that we do share a regional flood and coastal committee environment agency area, and if it's the same pot, I'm just wondering what the effect on Lincolnshire will be on the cost that it's obviously going to take to keep those rivers defended a very long way inland, and whether other alternatives are being considered, perhaps sluice gates and structures much closer to the wash.
Yes, thank you. Part of the Fens work is looking at, I think it's action 2 on the Fens measures, is looking at sort of the tactical planning and baselining, and that work is designed to basically answer that question, Councillor Ashton, in terms of, you know, how much money are we likely to need going forward for various different scenarios. So yeah, it's certainly something which we might not have an answer at the moment, but it's something which we're working to sort of calculate at the moment.
Thank you, Morgan. Any further questions? Right, we'll move on to the steeping then, Morgan, if we may.
Okay, we want to go on to the first slide, which I think is the slide 10, which is the front cover of the action plan. It really sort of describes the partnership of the Environment Agency, Lindsey Marsh Drainage Board, East Lindsey District Council, Wynnum Forth Drainage Board, Lincolnshire County Council, and the NFU, and as well as, you know, members of the local community that have helped to create this action plan. We go on to the next slide, slide 11, which is the themes that we've created to manage the action plan. So there's a bit of a reminder. So improving the flow through the system, a resilient community and infrastructure. Number 3 is strengthening and maintaining the defences, and 4 is flood water storage, which includes some of the natural flood management measures in the upper catchment. So if we go on to the next slide, we'll go through each of those in turn. So improving the flow through the system. So we're sort of looking at continued effective sort of weed management. I believe that the weed management this year is about to be started if it's not done already. Lindsey Marsh Drainage Board has managed the completion of around about 7.5 kilometres of dredging, and over 56,000 metres cubed of silt have been removed from that. It's good use of what we call the public sector cooperation agreement, which allows different flood risk management authorities to work on each other's assets, and that's been utilised in this instance. There's more work planned for it's now early 2022 for the next phase of dredging. And potentially more over the year following that, provided we can get the relevant sort of business case together. But you know, you can see on the left you've got a picture of the actual dredger in operation, and on the right some of the additional work that needs to be carried out. And I think this is some of the work that people don't realise. So on the right you've got a very, very large storage lagoon, so the silt is effectively pumped into this storage lagoon, and it's how the silt is dried out, and the water drains out of that. It works its way from sort of the bottom right into the sort of top left, I think, or the top right hand corner, as the silt sort of drops out of that water. and then the water is released back into the watercourse, hopefully clear. We have to sort of monitor the condition of that water as it obviously goes out into the channel. So that's the improving the flow through the system. Other things we're looking at in the future as well, as we're carrying out a certain amount of modelling on the catchment, and we'll use that to help us inform how we can perhaps manage the flow through some of the structures as well. We've got structures, we've got a sluice gate just downstream of Wainfleet that helps to retain water levels for the summer months, and lowers the water level slightly for the winter months. And we have sluice gates at the end of the steeping river into the tidal river. So we're hoping to be better informed how we can manage water through those structures going forward. If we look at the next slide, slide 13, which is the next theme, which is a resilient community and infrastructure. So this is a key part of the National Flood and Risk Management Strategy is around resilience. All authorities, no matter what flood risk, it's important to note, can potentially provide flood risk management to a certain level, beyond which there will always be a flood. Hopefully rarely that will overwhelm those defences, overwhelm the system, and we have to be well prepared for that. So this is looking at how we can better prepare the community for future flooding. So we been successful in bidding for money to improve the flood warning system. So we're carrying out sort of extensive modelling of the system to better inform our flood warnings, make them more timely, more accurate. And that work is underway this year. Go on to the next slide, please. Strengthening and maintaining our defences. So the picture on the left you can see is extensive work which is being underway this year. You can see we've been putting sort of steel mesh in some of the embankments, which helps to protect against vermin damage. And on the right there, we've been putting in toe protection, which protects the berm and the bank and the lower bank of the and the lower banks from eroding effectively into the watercourse. So a very extensive programme this year of that sort of recovery work. Going forward, we do have a bid in for grant and aid for a wider project going forward. So this would deliver something like about £1.2 million of grant and aid work, and we'd be looking to supplement that with around about £2 million of partnership funding from various different sources. And that work is ongoing. Again, hopefully we would want to start construction on some of that work by the end of the current sort of 6-year programme, so up to 2027. Finally, we've been doing a lot of work on the natural flood management work. We've had a specialist consultant looking at the catchment, and they've just, quite hot off the press, actually provided a report with potential sites for natural flood management throughout the catchment. These are not within the steeping catchment, but they're examples elsewhere of the sort of things which they've identified. So on the left, a couple of pictures on the left show good examples of a leaky dam, and they sort of provided sort of monitoring there. These things always happen in the middle of the night, but it sort of shows how the water has been held back through sort of an overnight storm, which helps to delay the onset of flood water into the main system. And on the right there, there's a small bund at the bottom of a field there, in agreement with the landowner, sort of provided a small amount of floodwater storage. Added up over many fields, that adds up to quite a lot. So we've now in the process of putting in a bid to the flood committee, the RFCC, for funds to take that forward over the coming years. As a very quick canter through the steeping action plan, there's lots of work been undertaken this year, and plenty more planned in the years to come. So I'll leave it there and take any questions on that. Thank you.
Any questions, anybody? Richard.
I would like to ask a question of Morgan about the valuation of agricultural land when assessing capital projects. I would find it so disappointing how little value is put on good quality agricultural land as compared with housing. Is there any chance that this will be changed as in future, or do you think we're stuck with this forever?
Well, as part of some of the FENS work we're undertaking, one of the actions is looking at sort of that very issue, the value of agricultural land, working very closely with partners such as Simon Fisher, the NFU, to help sort of influence that going forward. But as you say, yeah, we struggle to get a lot of benefits for agricultural land. Certainly not the same as you know, sort of large scale housing and critical infrastructure. But it's certainly an area which we're looking at closely in the years to come. It's not something we can affect locally. It's something that would would have to come from a national policy change on that. So we're looking to provide influence that evidence that may influence that going forward.
Thank you, Morgan. Any further questions? No. Thank you very much for your report. The committee were invited to consider and comment. I think we've done that adequately. Obviously, we need to note the fact that our Lincolnshire farmland probably grows 48% of the green crops in England, so that is quite an important thing. And also, we need to start considering the water not being a problem, but more of a resource. And when we get to that and start moving it around, it'll work for us rather than working against us. So moving on from there, everybody's reasonably happy with the progress. Yes, Alison.
I don't know whether you actually closed that item or not, but would this be the correct committee, or would it be perhaps Environment and Economy? But ought we actually, as a county council, be actively lobbying government for our land, our agricultural land, to be properly valued, instead of just sitting back and accepting it? Surely we're the ones who ought to be proactive in saying, right, you've got to now, especially we've gone through Brexit and we've got problems with transport. You need our food more and more. We've just got to stand up for ourselves. Thank you.
I think the pressure on us all to get Lincolnshire recognised. I can't think any of us would sit back and be silent about it. So are we all in agreement that we've noted and worked on the paper? Thank you very much. Then it's agreed. Moving on to the next item, it's Simon Love and it's Anglian Waters update. Simon.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Just by way of introduction, I'm Simon Love. I'm head of water recycling networks at Anglian Water. So that's overall responsibility for Anglian Water's sewer network and associated pumping stations. So thanks for the time this morning. Could you move on to the first slide, please? Thank you. Just reflecting, if I may, on the past winter, extremely wet winter, really following the theme that we've spoken about, increasing numbers of incidents. 2019, as I'm sure we're all very well aware in this forum, was a very much Lincolnshire focused event. The winter that we've just seen was much broader. Certainly the impact on the Nen catchments and the Ouse were significant. However, the southern part of Lincolnshire certainly had continued challenges. We've been experiencing high water levels in the northern chalk areas and the Links limestone, but we certainly saw a significant impact in South Lincolnshire. And those that you will recall, in 2019, we had running 6 local environmental position statements. So that's where we effectively pump straight from our networks and systems into the environment to protect service to customers and also prevent flooding. And in 2019, across Lincolnshire, principally, we had 6 of those permits in place. A lot of them were up in the northern regions around the Humber. Now, those 6 permits, so those 6 sort of over-pumping operations, were the first I can recall in my career here, which goes back several decades. In the last winter, we had 28 in operation. And that just gives you some idea of the scale of the challenge we faced. One of the things we can do to protect customers and protect service to customers and flooding is tanker from our assets. We normally, on a day-to-day basis, have around 60 tankers operating in the region. You'll see the blue tankers buzzing around. Their primary role is to remove biosolids from sewage treatment works and convey them to treatment centres. The whole of that fleet was dedicated to effectively emergency response to prevent flooding and pollution and issues with our network. In addition to that, we bought a further 60 tankers in. So we had tankers coming in from right across our region and beyond. And at one point, we had 120 tankers operating against that normal fleet of 60. From my recollection, I was trying to sort of recall in the Lincolnshire area, certainly there were problems at Scotwick, Tallington, Little Bytham, Bainton, West Deeping, Great Gonaby and Dunstan were the ones that stuck in my mind, but I'm sure there were others that I sort of couldn't recall at this sort of stage, but significant impact. And that impact actually continued for well into the spring in terms of the recovery of those systems. Thank you. Could you move on to the next slide, please? Just wanted to highlight some of the great things we're doing in terms of partnership funding initiatives. And just hasten to add, this is not just with our colleagues at Links County Council, but also with the EA and district councils as well. And although I have a regional role, so responsibility across the whole region, I have to say that Lincolnshire is definitely a primary area where we undertake the majority of such schemes. And I can recall 5 schemes that we've undertaken to address surface water and sewer flooding with Links County Council. Certainly one in Binbrook with East Lindsey, and our colleagues at the EA certainly with 2 schemes where we've worked on flood protection and the associated, obviously protection of our assets as well. It's worth calling out particularly some activity we've been undertaking in the West Deeping area, where we've been working with the County Council and the IDB to clear, we've certainly cleared a significant number of blockages within assets. And we've diverted 27 properties, we've re-diverted roof drainage away from the sewerage system. And that work is being extended to the Barholm and Tallington areas. And I'm absolutely sure that's going to make a considerable difference going forward to risk of flooding. The blue circles on that little map there highlight where we are funding the National Flood Forum work. And this is focused on working with local communities regarding resilience to flooding from groundwater, surface water and sewer flooding. And we're working principally in 5 locations but it's worth highlighting the work we're already doing in the Scotwick area, which, talking to my local colleagues, I believe has been very well received. But we're, rather than just relying on that work, we are continuing to look at sources of infiltration in the Scotwick area and undertaking lining work, etc., where we can to reduce flood risk. The purple circles indicate where we're undertaking, we're leading on some hydraulic modelling, that particularly in the Grantham and Long Bennington area, which will look for model options for future potential schemes that we can undertake. And the black circle indicates some work we're doing in the Metheringham area, something I've been personally involved with over the years at the in the Park Crescent Station Road area, where we're looking to divert a trunk sewer to prevent flooding that has blighted that area for quite a considerable amount of time. And finally, just wanted to call out that the issue that was picked up earlier about the DEFRA Innovative Resilience Project, which I'm absolutely convinced is as a result of our collaboration. I think that was absolutely key in obtaining that funding, which is absolutely great news. So just a bit of a high level run through some of the things that we're doing, some of the the great work we're doing together, to be honest. Really happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Simon. Councillor Fleetwood.
Good morning, Simon. Whilst it's great to see the excellent work you're doing in some parts of the county and the additional resources you've been put into various locations, I am more than disappointed not to see any mention of that wonderful place called Scothan Lane, Langworth, which has been a source of many years flooding. Bungalows there have been flooded to window sill height, possibly not that water coming from Anglian Water, from other sources, but Anglian Water did put a water treatment plant into there, a brand new plant. Yet 2 years ago, I seem to recall the road was flooded, there was effluent sewage floating around quite happily, tankers were not attending site as frequently as they might, there couldn't be a road closure put on it quickly enough. In fact, there was no road closure put on it. It was a very embarrassing situation for County Council because there were still vehicles wading through the flood water. Yet, I come to a presentation and I don't see any mention of anything on the map. I did address this issue to you when you came into post 2-3 years ago when we were at Skegness, I believe, and you were hot-footing it to see the parish council on that date. Yet, so far, I can't see any remedial work coming forwards with regard to any defects from Anglian Water. And let's be honest, the 2019 flooding is pointed very pointedly at Anglian Water's failure on that occasion. Can you tell me what you're actually doing in this location and if you are providing any level of feedback to the parish council?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fleetwood. What I'd be grateful if I can take that offline. I'll get some sort of detailed feedback and contact you directly with an update regarding our activities there.
Thank you, Simon. Any further questions? Oh, Councillor Alison Austin.
Thank you. It's not really a question. Thank you for the presentation. Unfortunately, I couldn't see the circles. Can we have, and I don't see it on ModGov anywhere, do I? Or have I missed it?
Councillor Austin, this was a verbal and the slides were added. So I'm sure the slides can be posted round the committee. Thank you.
Yes.
If anybody wants any further detail, any specific things we're doing, really happy to provide that.
Thank you very much, Trina.
Oh, Chairman, can I just then follow that up, please? Have you any comments about areas where surface water commingles with the foul drainage system, please, which has been, I think, probably like Councillor Fleetwood, one of the things that we've suffered, with manholes lifted, and afterwards telltale strips of toilet tissue and so on sticking around on the road for a long time. You know, these antiquated systems have just got to be dealt with. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, sewerage systems, by their very nature, are not sealed. So we are, when there's inundation, escape, pluvial flooding, our systems are affected like everybody else in terms of flooding. So it is a, you know, it's a perennial problem really. But certainly, if you've got specific locations, that, you know, that's the work we'll be doing, looking at specific locations, you know, and following up on those. But it's difficult to give a sort of a detailed answer. It's a bit of a generic issue. We are at the bottom of our sewers intrinsically are at the bottom of the chain in terms of, you know, flooding. So we are affected like everybody else.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Baxter.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'd also like to thank your colleagues, Rose Schisler and her colleagues, who have spent a lot of time and effort in the Deepings, West Deeping and Tallington in particular, in recent months. At one of the parish council meetings, we were having a discussion about who takes responsibility for the water. When is it county council water and when is it Anglian Water's water, and who makes the decision, especially in a time of crisis. And there was talk of closer partnership working between the county and Anglian Water. I just wondered if you had anything to say about that.
I have to say we approached this winter, and at no stage in my experience did we take a step back. I think that rather than arguing about, you know, roles and responsibilities at the time, we did our best under extremely, you know, difficult circumstances. You know, the number of LEPs, the, you know, local enforcement statements, etc., unprecedented in my time, and that's, you know, some 30 or 40 years of experience. But, you know, things are definitely, I think, changing. You know, and I think that's a theme that's come out of this morning. We are seeing more and more, you know, extreme events, and I certainly remember, you know, in the last 10 years, I can remember three or four such incidents. So we don't take a step back. We take a step forward, and, you know, rather than debating whose problem it is, that's actually for another day in terms of the follow up. But, you know, from my, you know, our position here, and my position will be we will continue to work as closely as we can with all our flood risk partners. So yeah, it's you know, it's definitely a shared issue. It's not a you know, just Anglian Water issue or county council issue. It's definitely a shared issue. And we've touched on riparian ownership, and, you know, that certainly is an issue in my experience, where, you know, we need to, you know, continue to work together. So yeah, full steam ahead from this side, and we'll continue to work together. Yeah.
Thank you, Simon. I'm going to bring David in, and I'll assure Councillor Baxter it is a true partnership.
Thank you, Chairman. I think just to reinforce the comments that were just being made there, the view of the Lincolnshire Flood and Drainage and Water Management Partnership is that in times of emergency, we don't squabble about whose water it is. We do treat it as a single approach, and I think the next paper on the agenda hopefully will outline that position with more clarity.
Sorry, I'm not just talking about in times of emergency, also preventative maintenance works and so on. The conversation that took place in Tallington was about the responsibility for the, I want to call it the sewer, but I'm probably getting the wrong, the water course, or the sewer, or the drainage, or the gully, or whatever you want to call it. It was said at Tallington that we, the County Council, had agreed to work with Anglian Water, which is great news, but it seemed to be presented as some kind of an innovation. So that's what I was looking for clarity on. Thank you.
Okay. Again, and just to clarify that, then yeah, the partnership does exist to ensure that joined up approach all the time. It tends to be during emergency that these issues can sometimes emerge, and we do have that position for emergencies, but also the structures of the partnership, the local drainage groups exist to make sure that level of coordination can be put in place as a matter of course.
Thank you, David. Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to add a little bit of extra detail to this, if the surface water system is receiving purely highways water, then it's an LCC system. If the system is receiving highways water and roof water of properties, then it is usually Anglian Water's responsibility for maintenance and repairs. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Councillor Fleetwood.
Yes, I think it could be said that if you see things floating in the water, that effectively you might well point the finger towards Anglian Water. Is that a good way to put it?
I couldn't possibly comment. Any further questions? Thank you. Thank you very much for your verbal update and the slides which you added.
Yeah, I'll get an update regarding Langworth. Yeah.
Thank you. And I don't know what to say to that. Do we agree with the content of the report? Thank you. We're agreed. Moving on to item 10. It's the emergency response, and it's Ian Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. My name's Ian Reid. I'm the Head of Emergency Planning and Business Continuity for the County Council, and I lead the team that plans for, trains for and responds to emergencies. And quite clearly, as our two major risks in the county flooding, I work with all partners that have been speaking previously to me this morning. What I would like to do is to just inform the committee on 4 points from my report, really. The first of which is a review of our multi-agency flood plans. Because of the risk in Lincolnshire, we have a separate strategic coastal flood plan, and then we have an inland flood plan. And last year, September last year, DEFRA, who are the lead government department for flooding, published guidance on the format of these multi-agency flood plans, and then commissioned a review, not just of us here in Lincolnshire, but this is a national review. And the Environment Agency have taken an undertaking to look at an audit of our plans locally. So what we've done, because we've got the two plans, we've worked very closely with the Environment Agency over the last couple of months. We've worked on a pre-audit, and the committee will be pleased to know that there are no major issues that have been found with either of our plans. There are some recommendations, but they're minor ones, and we're working with the Environment Agency to work through those recommendations ahead of the formal audit, which commences on the 24th of September. And the relevance of those plans for one of the other items you'll see later on in my report. The second thing that I'd like to inform the committee around is some work that we've been doing around lower tier flooding incidents. And it's been really interesting listening to the conversation because these are ones that sometimes can slip through the net because there are only one or two properties. But if your property is one of those one or two, then on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 9 to 10 if your property or your business is flooded. So we're very keen that there's some sort of coordination at this level. As incidents progress and we get into wider flooding, coastal flooding, inland flooding, there's tried and tested plans, the two that I've mentioned previously, that are put in place by the Lincolnshire Resilience Forum, which is a partnership of the emergency services, the local authorities, the Environment Agency and health organisations that respond to all emergencies. But we felt there was a little bit of a gap around coordinating these smaller scale incidents. So we've been working with David's team, we've been working with the Environment Agency, the district councils, the LLFA, Fire and Rescue Service and ourselves to put an MOU together with those other local authorities about what we do in these situations. And what we've agreed is that we will put together a small team, and it's my team, the emergency planning team, that will coordinate this both during office hours, outside of our office hours because of our duty officer system. And we'll get all of these organisations together and we'll look at the properties, we'll look at the calls that are coming in, and we'll just make sure that we're making best use of our resources. And I'm really trying to steer clear from sandbags here, because it's not just about sandbag requests, it's about equipment, it's about staff, it's about delivery of resources. So it's wider than just sandbags. So the aim of this is to make sure that it's a coordinated response, and we're best placed then to escalate it if it becomes a major issue or there's more properties being involved, rather than just one local authority area or a couple of individual properties or businesses. So with that in mind, it's okay having a system. You never know whether it works until you start to exercise it. And then late, I think it's 25th of August that we held the first one, a small scale exercise with East Lindsey District Council. We brought all of these agencies together, we ran some scenarios, and we looked at how we could best do this. And it's fair to say that the introduction of Teams meetings has made that a little bit easier, certainly out of hours, and we've put some systems in place. Following on from that, we've got further exercises planned with other district councils as well to ensure that everybody has had a chance to participate, and we go through the process and we fine-tune the process as we go through with different partners. So there's more planned. Have to say it was really successful. We've got a really clear idea of when we would need to escalate, and we call them tiers really, tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3. I'm talking about a tier 1 response at the moment. A tier 2 response is where we get a multi-agency partnership together to consider that wider flooding, and then a tier 3 is when we have something like East Coast flooding or widespread flooding, where we bring a proper command and control system in place. And you saw that in place for things like Wainfleet in 2019. That would be what I mean by tier 3. So we're reviewing our plans. We've got a new tier 1 system in place for smaller scale flooding. And again, I've talked about validating those plans. We've got an opportunity to do that next year with FloodX 2022. FloodX 2022 is a national exercise that is taking place with all Lincolnshire local resilience forum along the East Coast. It's there to just not only test coastal flooding, but inland flooding as well. Here in Lincolnshire, we belong to groups. One is River Trent to support the Trent Flood Framework, and the other one is the East Coast LRFs, which obviously support the East Coast Flood Framework. And traditionally, they've always exercised separately. This exercise aims to bring it all together in one exercise. So we've got the opportunity to validate the plans that will be audited later on this year by the EA, and also to test our tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3 response, which would be really, really useful for us. With that in mind, we're making sure that we've got some clear aims and objectives, and in the paper you'll see the 6 objectives for us here in Lincolnshire, and also the national ones are there to make sure that those plans have been validated, and that we test the frameworks that join up with regional and central government around our reporting during these situations as well. So when I wrote this paper, the LRF were yet to confirm whether they would make FloodX 2022 the county's major exercise. But I'm happy to report that last week I met with the Deputy Chief Constable and Chief Fire Officer and the rest of the LRF management team, and it's been agreed that the LRF as a partnership will commit to this major exercise next year, next September, which will be the 19th to the 23rd. And I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for the committee to come and observe some of the activities that will be going on during that week. If that's something that they would like to do, we'd welcome you along. The last bit of my update, I would just like to draw your attention to the LRF pilot funding project, which is taking place at the moment. So following EU exit, following COVID, following these 2 long-term national emergencies, which, to be fair to LRFs, they were never set up to deal with. They were set up to deal with short-term emergencies and then recover from short-term emergencies. So Wainfleet, again, is a classic example. Central government have decided that they want to review the Civil Contingencies Act, which is the legislation that governs what we do, and does as an authority. We are Category 1 responders, so we have duties under that legislation. And also to look at how they can best fund LRFs and look at new issues and emerging threats that are coming to the UK at the moment. And we've mentioned climate change earlier on in the meeting. That's something that is coming LRF's way as well. So as part of that funding bid, the LRF have been given some money, and we've been asked to submit bids for a central pot of money to fund projects that will enhance the activities of the LRF. And I just wanted to inform the committee that we've put 5 bids forward actually in Lincolnshire, and 4 of them are really applicable to this area. So better use of drones, because we've got a few agencies now that use drones. Obviously there's legal issues with the use of drones, but you can imagine that if we had an East Coast inundation or a breach where we can't get people onto banks, and again, I'm going back to Wainfleet again, but the banks were an issue there to get staff and resources on. The use of drones is really, really useful, and the use of drones being able to transmit footage from the incident site back into the county emergency centre is something that will be really, really useful. An enhanced mapping capability, and some of the previous presenters have talked about historical flood data and how we map that. We've got a system in the county emergency centre that layers data, so it doesn't only tell you where our fire, police, ambulance, hospitals, care homes are situated. We build data up, and historical flooding data will be really, really useful so that we can put that to good use during future incidents. We're looking at training to ensure that there's a better training and consistency of training across the UK. Because that's better then for us if we're calling for mutual aid. And I use East Coast inundation as an example again. Might be that if we need some help on the East Coast, we can get our mutual aid from the West Coast and vice versa. But the training needs to be quite standardised so that we can ensure that when we do ask people to come and assist us, or we go and assist other people, we are really doing some good rather than need training when we get there. And also we're looking at engagement. I think it's fair to say over the last 2 years, the LRF have dealt with a lot of agencies that have never been involved in emergency planning before. So insurance companies, businesses, Chamber of Commerce, agriculture, all of them have a part to play, and all of them will have a part to play in the future. So we need to look at how we make sure that we don't leave anyone out, and we engage with all of these other partners. We're expecting the news of whether we've been successful in our funding bids in the next 4 weeks. What we have tried to do, though, is to ensure that if our individual bids aren't successful, it may be that we can add them to other areas and LRS projects, and we can still get to do what we want. But it's fair to say the LRF will still look at these 5 projects, even if we're unsuccessful on both of those counts. I think I'll leave it there if that's okay, Chairman, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Bunny.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's great what we're getting here, looking at response, emergency and all that sort of thing. But I do wonder, and perhaps it's the wrong point to mention this, but I do feel for those people who are continuously flooded, we get a number of them, I'm sure, where year after year they appear to be flooded. They're getting responses, but they don't actually have their problem solved. And I know that certainly a number of people get very, very anxious because they see the weather forecast, they hear the rain coming down, and they believe their property could be flooded. What's being done about it? And I think we need to make sure that we do follow through that sort of situation as much as we do also look at the emergency planning, because it's all very well saying, yes, an emergency will come and sort you out, but they shouldn't really be expecting that emergency to occur if they can help it.
Thank you very much. We are moving to being proactive, and that hadn't happened up to last year. Thank you, Councillor Austin.
I understand the value of sandbags is very questionable in many practical situations. What is the current policy for the distribution of sandbags, please?
David.
I'm going to let Ian come in on that initially, Chair, if I may.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chairman. it's fair to say that as a local authority, as local authorities go in Lincolnshire, the sandbag policy differs from district council to district council. Some provide them, some don't. Certainly there's an enhanced provision from a county level, but we're hoping that this MOU that we have and this small team that get together for smaller flooding emergencies can help coordinate that. I've been doing emergency planning for a long time, and sandbags has been an issue in all of that time. And we've tried very hard to get one policy for the council, but unfortunately we're still not there yet, which is why I'm keen to not just talk about sandbags, but talk about resources as a whole.
Thank you. On behalf of Councillor Reid, who's not here at the moment, back in December 2020, we had an incident at Bourne Elsey Park and Thirlby of flooding. One point of call and response for local flood coordinator, LCC being the lead, with Floodline being the official channel that so badly let us down at that time. This report makes reference but fails to deliver a solution. Where do we go from here? Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, was that question around floodline or was it a report?
A bit of both. Floodline that let us down because you get numerous calls for the fire because houses needed to be pumped out. Floodline, the coordination didn't seem to be there at that time. There was, again, a lack of sandbags. You know, when you've got water lapping at your door, you do need the sandbags to help prevent it coming in. There, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I can't really comment on floodline. Perhaps Environment Agency colleagues may be able to comment around that, but certainly going back to the new arrangements we've got under the MOU, we're hoping that we can better distribute sandbags if sandbags is something that can help going forward. So it's not just about us as a county council delivering sandbags or district councils. That's why we've engaged with fire and rescue as well, because it might be in that particular case, fire and rescue are most appropriate, or where they've got the nearest resources to deliver those sandbags. So we're hoping that we're making better use of our resources than ever we have done before.
Thank you.
Chairman, I think the particular incident that, that the council is referring to, we did address in a previous committee meeting, and the arrangements that Ian has described in the current paper, particularly around the rapid deployment of a local group in the event of a particular incident, has been designed to address particular gaps that were identified at the time.
Thanks, Chairman. Ian, page 52, third paragraph down, when the formation of this group comes along, who actually takes the lead, and are Anglia Water Board part of that group? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. So we will coordinate that group because we've got two duty officers on duty 24/7 that are contacted through fire and rescue control. We will have the numbers for all of those agencies, and we will coordinate the meeting and invite all the groups to the meeting. Anglian Water don't particularly play a part in this meeting, but if it escalated to a tier 2, then they're part of that multi-agency group.
Thank you, Chairman. In what has happened to the small local groups that we used to have? I think Steve Easton Harris set several of them up. It tended to be after, like, the Boston floods. Have those now been superseded, or is there still a role for those local community groups to deal with various forms of emergency?
Thanks, Councillor Austin. Yeah, Steve is still working on our Resilient Communities programme, and it's certainly an area for expansion. I think we've got over 100, I think it's around about 135 local groups that Steve still does the 5-step training programme with. And we also provide them with equipment now in partnership with the Environment Agency. So they have tabards, radios. In fact, as part of the LOF exercises, we try to include a local group in those exercises as well. So this year's exercise will include one. And we'll also include them in FloodX 2022. So rather than the programme stalling, it's expanding all the time.
Sorry, we've been asked to note the paper. That's the first one I've forgotten to press the button on. And does everybody agree? Thank you very much. Moving on to the last part, paper 10.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is the Flood and Water Management Scrutiny Committee work programme. This item enables the committee to consider and comment on the content of its work programme and to ensure that scrutiny activity is focused where it can be of greatest benefit. So the committee today is invited to review and consider and comment on the work programme as it has been presented through your agenda item, and to highlight any additional area for discussion over scrutiny activity that could be included for consideration in the future. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Anybody, any comments? No. What I'd like to see, Tom and myself visited Digby. I think it would be quite a good thing to bring a small paper on that to the next meeting, by virtue that we've got some people that have only joined the committee recently. It would give them an idea of the works we do and how we go about it and what a finished scheme would look like. Yes, Tom.
Chairman, just to add to that, it may be of benefit the next time there's a site visit to review a pre and post works of a scheme that's being done, to invite members of the committee, particularly new members, so they can see it before and after. I don't know if that would be possible or when that would be, but that might be something that new members may find of interest.
All things are possible. Paula.
Thank you very much. I wonder if I could ask if this committee, or certainly yourself as chairman, could request a meeting with government to discuss the issue of red diesel, because if red diesel is actually stopped for pumping stations and plant and machinery, it's going to have a huge impact on the finances of local drainage boards. So if we could perhaps ask for a meeting and perhaps some clarification on that, I think that might be helpful.
Thank you. David.
I think that is something that we could pursue through our connections with the Association of Drainage Authorities nationally.
Councillor Ash.
Yeah, just picking up on that, it might be useful as a paper for a future committee to perhaps collate the total cost for Lincolnshire or Drainage Board within Lincolnshire. I imagine all of the IDBs in Lincolnshire should be able to provide those figures readily, because I mean we all in our own where we sit on individual Drainage Board will be aware of the figures, the cost for the board that we're on. But I think it's only when you begin to look at this on a scale across somewhere like Lincolnshire does it come into sharp contrast. And I think Councillor Ashley Morris makes an incredibly valid observation. This is a vast amount of money for these boards, and there is a certain iniquity here when, as I note, that golf courses and travelling fun fairs are going to be able to continue to use lower duty diesel for their operations, but our drainage boards, upon which thousands of people depend for either keeping their homes dry, their farmland dry, or their businesses dry, it seems to be in a different category.
Thank you for that. So are we agreed with the programme going forward? I think I have already written with my other hat on that subject, but I certainly don't mind writing again. Right, so close of business. Thank you very much.